Sex and Character by Otto Weininger, Chapter 1, Males and Females. In the wildest treatment of most living things, a blunt separation of them into males or females no longer suffices for the known facts. The limitations of these conceptions have been felt more or less by many writers. The first purpose of this work is to make this point clear. I agree with other authors who, in a recent treatment of the facts connected with this subject, have taken as a starting point what has been established by embryology regarding the existence of human beings, plants, and animals of an embryonic stage neutral as regards to sex. In the case of a human embryo of less than 5 weeks, for instance, the sex to which it would afterwards belong cannot be recognized. In the 5th week of fetal life, processes begin which, by the end of the 5th month of pregnancy, have turned the genital rudiments, at first alike in the sexes, into one sex and have determined the sex of the whole organism. The details of these processes need not be described more fully here. It can be shown that, however distinctly unisexual an adult plant, animal, or human being may be, there is always a certain presence of the bisexual character, never a complete disappearance of the characters of the underdeveloped sex. Sexual differentiation, in fact, is never complete. All the peculiarities of the male sex may be present in the female in some form, however weakly developed. And so also the characteristics of the woman persist in the man, although perhaps they are not so completely rudimentary. The characters of the other sex occur in the one sex in a vestigial form. Thus, in the case of human beings in which our interest is greatest, to take an example, it will be found that the most womanly woman has a growth of colourless hair known as languor in the position of the male beard, and in the most manly man there are developed under the skin of the breast masses of glandular tissue connected with the nipples. This condition of things has been minutely investigated in the true genital organs and ducts, the region called the urinogenital tract, and in each sex there has been found a complete but rudimentary set of parallels to the organs of the other sex. These embryological conclusions can be brought into relation with another set of facts. Haeckel has used the word gonochorism for the separation of the sexes, and in different classes and groups of creatures, different degrees of gonochorism may be noted. Different kinds of animals and plants may be distinguished by the extent to which the characters of one sex are rudimentary in the other. The most extreme case of sexual differentiation, the sharpest gonochorism, occurs in sexual dimorphism, that is to say, in that condition of affairs in which, as for instance in some water fleas, the males and females of the same species differ as much or even more from one another as the members of different species or genera. There is not so sharply marked gonochorism amongst vertebrates as in the case of crustacea or insects. Amongst the former there does not exist a distinction between males and females so complete as to reach sexual dimorphism. A condition much more frequent amongst them is the occurrence of forms intermediate in regards to sex, what is called abnormal hermaphroditism, whilst in certain fishes hermaphroditism is a normal condition. I must point out here that it must not be assumed that there exist only extreme males with scantly remains of the female condition, extreme females with traces of the male, hermaphrodite, or transitional forms, and wide gaps between these conditions. I am dealing specially with human beings, but what I have to say might be applied with more or less modification to nearly all creatures in which sexual reproduction takes place. Amongst human beings, the state of the case is as follows. There exists all sorts of intermediate conditions between male and female sexual transitional forms. In physical inquiries, an ideal gas is assumed, that is to say, a gas, the behavior of which follows the Boyle-Guy-Lusac exactly, although in fact no such gas exists, and laws are deduced from this so that the derivations from the ideal gas laws may be established in the case of actually existing gases. In the same fashion, we may assume the existence of an ideal man M and an ideal woman W as sexual types, although these types do not actually exist. Such types not only can be constructed, but must be constructed, as in the art, so in science. The real purpose is to reach the type, the Platonic idea. The science of physics investigates the behavior of bodies that are absolutely rigid or absolutely elastic in the full knowledge that neither the one nor the other actually exist. The intermediate conditions actually existing between the two absolute states of matter serve merely as a starting point for the investigation of the types, and in the practical application of the theory are treated as mixtures and exhaustively analyzed. So also there exist only the intermediate stages between the absolute males and females, the absolute conditions never presenting themselves. Let it be noted clearly that I am discussing the existence not merely of embryonic sexual neutrality, but of a permanent bisexual condition. Nor am I taking into consideration merely those intermediate sexual conditions whose bodily or physio-hermaphrodites upon which, up to the present, attention has been concentrated. In another respect, my conception is new. Until now, in dealing with sexual intermediates, only hermaphrodites were considered, as if, to use a physical analogy, there were in between the two extremes a single group of intermediate forms, and not an intervening tract equally beset with stages in different degrees of transition. The fact is that males and females are like two substances combined in different proportions, but with either element never wholly missing. We find, so to speak, never either a man or a woman, but only the male condition and the female condition. Any individual A or B is never to be designated merely as a man or a woman, but by a formula showing that it is a composite of male and female characteristics in different proportions. For instance, as follows. A is alpha M, alpha prime W, B is beta W, beta prime M, always remembering that each of the factors alpha, alpha prime, beta, beta prime must be greater than 0 and less than unity. Further proofs of the validity of this conception are numerous, and I have already given in the preface a few of the most general. We may recall the existence of men with female pelvises and female breasts with narrow waists, overgrowth of the hair of the head, or of women with small hips and flat breasts, with deep brass voices and beards. The presence of hair on the chin is more common than is supposed, as women are naturally at pains to remove it. I am not speaking of the special growth that often appears on the faces of women who have reached middle age. All such peculiarities, many of them coinciding in the same individuals, are well known to doctors and anatomists, although their general significance has not been understood. One of the most striking proofs of the view that I have been unfolding is presented by the great range of numerical variation to be found where sexual characters have been measured either by the same or by different anthropological or anatomical workers. The figures obtained by measuring female characteristics do not begin where those from males leave off, but the two sets overlap. The more obvious this uncertainty in the theory of sexual intermediate forms may be, the more it is to be deplored in the interests of true science. Anatomists and anthropologists of the ordinary type have by no means striven against the scientific representation of the sexual types, but as for the most part they regarded measurements as the best indicators. They were overwhelmed with the number of exceptions, and thus, so far, measurement has brought only vague and indefinite results. The course of statistical science, which marks off our industrial age from earlier times, although perhaps on account of its distant relation to mathematics, it has been regarded as especially scientific, has in reality hindered the progress of knowledge. It has dealt with averages, not with types. It has not been recognized that in pure as opposed to applied science, it is a type that must be studied, and so those who are concerned with the type must turn their backs on the methods and conclusions of current morphology and physiology. The real measurements and investigations of details have yet to be made. Those that exist now are inapplicable in true science. Knowledge must be obtained of male and female by means of a right construction of the ideal man and ideal woman, using the word ideal in the same sense of typical, excluding judgment as to value. When these types have been recognized and built up, we shall be in a position to consider individual cases, and their analysis as mixtures in different proportions will be neither difficult nor fruitless. I shall now give a summary of the contents of this chapter. Living beings cannot be described bluntly as of one sex or another. The real world, from the point of view of sex, may be regarded as swaying between 2 points, no actual individual being at either point, but somewhere between the two. The task of science is to define the position of any individual between these 2 points. The absolute conditions of the two extremes are not metaphysical abstractions above or outside the world of experience, but their construction is necessary as a philosophical and practical mode of describing the actual world. A presentiment of this bisexuality of life derived from the actual absence of complete sexual differentiation is very old. Traces of it may be found in Chinese myths, but it became active in Greek thought. We may recall that mythical personification of bisexuality in the Hermaphroditos, the narrative of Aristophanes in the Platonic dialogue, or in later times the suggestion of Gnostic sect Theophytes, that primitive man was a man-woman.